When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the Dance of the Dragons. Are the events of House of the Dragon inevitable? Was that always going to happen? And was this great civil war of the Targaryens with their dragons always meant to happen? We're going to argue that in today's video. I think it's a pretty clear answer, but I want to go through at the beginning of this video kind of the early history of the Targaryens, just to kind of paint a picture to the type of reign they had within like the first 120 years of the Targaryen dynasty. So the Targaryen dynasty, as you guys all know, starts with Aegon the Conqueror, and that in and of itself is kind of like a Westeros civil war type situation in which Aegon brings them all under one banner in the, well, 6 kingdoms, as Dorne doesn't come into the 7 kingdoms until a little bit later on, but still. Again, the Targaryen dynasty, like most dynasties, starts with bloodshed. And then for the next, couple years, right, you have Aegon's reign goes down pretty well. Again, people aren't going to rebel against Aegon the Conqueror and his sister wives. There was some war in Dornish during his reign, but for the most part, no civil war, any of that stuff. Then you go to the next 2 kings. They're pretty much intertwined, Aenys and Maegor. In a lot of ways, both of their reigns can be established by, well, Aenys' incompetence, but really his bloodline versus Maegor and his faction with Visenya. So that has a mini Dance of the Dragons. Now, the only difference between Maegor and Aenys versus, say, the Dance of the Dragons, the House of the Dragon events, is, well, again, there's only a couple people that actually have full-grown dragons. And in this situation, Maegor had all the big dragons, right? He had Balerion, Visenya had Vhagar. There was really no competition. And we even see a mini dragon-on-dragon battle with Aegon the Uncrowned versus Maegor. So already within the first 50 years of the Targaryen dynasty, we'd already seen a mini Dance of the Dragons, which we end up seeing later on. But this is kind of swept under the rug a little bit because we see Jaehaerys' reign. He is the person that really builds all the blocks for the Targaryens to gain all of this power. Really under his reign is where we see all these different dragons, a bunch of different dragon riders, and that then explodes into Viserys' reign. But as you can see, after Viserys' reign, we know the dance breaks out almost immediately. It took 5 Targaryen kings for a dance to happen, which basically wipes out all of the dragons. And we'd already seen through three kings already civil wars were happening and things like of that nature. Only 2 kings really had a quote-unquote peaceful reign. And I would say Jaehaerys is really the only peaceful reign of the early parts of the Targaryen history. So when you put that into context, it's pretty obvious the dance was going to happen, even if you go back and you go, okay, Viserys actually doesn't marry Alicent, the Hightowers never get to fully get all of their power. It just kicks the rock down the road, right? Okay, at some point, there was going to be this split in the bloodlines, whether that's because of an ambition or whether it was because of genders, woman versus man and all that kind of stuff we saw being a pretty big part of the dance. It doesn't really matter. Eventually, that would have happened. You would have seen this civil war, whether it gets kicked down the road all the way to, say, the first Blackfyre Rebellion. Again, that's another part of this. Even though the dragons are gone, that doesn't mean the civil wars stop. If anything, the civil wars happen almost even more than they do in the first half of the Targaryen dynasty. We have a number of Blackfyre rebellions. If dragons were a thing, who knows what could have occurred later on in the history, because things get completely changed, right? Rhaenyra and everything that goes down there. Does she become queen? Does she not become queen? Let's just say here that Viserys puts in place enough that Rhaenyra is able to secure the throne, but then maybe there's problems down in her lineage. Who is to say that maybe her line with Harwin Strong that we believe, Jace, Luke, and all that, versus her line with Daemon, right? Who knows what could have happened there? Maybe that would have caused an entirely different conflict. We just don't know. And the purpose of this is kind of to show you the Targaryens have really made a name of having rebellions. They have rebellions all the time, right? That's what makes the Targaryen dynasty so fun to look at. It's not because there's a lot of times of peace. Almost quite the opposite. Outside of Jaehaerys, he's kind of an outlier. The Targaryens are almost always at war, whether it's fighting with Dorne, whether it's fighting their own civil wars. A conflict would have occurred at some point to then the dragons would have fought each other. Now, will I go as far as saying that they would go extinct? I won't go as far as saying that, because the issue that you have to look at with the dragons was, okay, who becomes king? Big spoiler for House of the Dragon, but the person that becomes king, Aegon the Third, that person really doesn't like dragons, kind of is okay with them going away. You also have some Maester nonsense going on in there as well. Would that have all kind of went down? Again, you're going into, we change a huge event in Targaryen history and kicks it down the road to it happening again. Who knows? The point of this video is to say the dance was inevitable. It was going to happen at some point. And whether it would have wiped out the dragons, who knows? Maybe it would have taken a number of different civil wars for eventually them to die out. But either way, it was inevitable. Saying that the only time for a dance would have been here with Viserys and Rhaenyra, it just doesn't make much sense to me. And people that don't think the dance was inevitable, I just don't get. Because if you even go back to Maegor's reign, the Hightowers were really trying to get more power and more into the Targaryen family. If you guys remember, the person that Maegor is forced to marry is a Hightower. The Hightowers were already trying to get on the throne. The Hightowers at this point of history, in the Targaryen history specifically, were at their biggest in power, right? They had a lot of influence going through the faith. I believe personally that they had a lot of influence in the Maesters and how that shapes world events and things like that. They were one of the largest and richest cities and families in Westeros. They were a faction that was definitely trying to get on the throne, and whether that was wedging, two different sides against each other or whatnot, that was the case. We see that play out during the dance. So thank you guys all for watching. Let me know what you guys think about the dance and if it was inevitable, and some of your own thoughts in terms of the Targaryen dynasty and really them having rebellions all the time. But bye guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.